primary concern here is to get on with chapter 4. So we have covered chapter 1, which was kind of a review of primary energy and some physics. Chapter 2 was solar thermal energy, which was more or less, so there's your kind of physics and primary energy primer. This was solar thermal, so you can sort of think of solar thermal as the simplest or most fundamental type of renewable energy. Warms. Here comes the sun, right? Here comes the light. The most abundant, absolutely. That 10,000 to 1 ratio. Remember, even though that 17 terawatt power budget we talked about is large, it's only 1% of 1% of all the energy that hits the planet. Chapter 3 takes it one step further and it says, hey, let's go straight from photons into electrons. That's all PV is about. It's just sort of skipping the combustion step, if you will, that we studied extensively in 101. So again, solar PV says, hey, I don't need nuclear energy, I don't need coal to make electricity. It hits the silicon bonds, does the photoelectric effect, which also incidentally is what Einstein won Nobel Prize for, studying the photoelectric effect. So that's your chapter 3. And then chapter 4 takes it one step further. And let me do this. One of my favorite images. So I think a couple people asked recently, so is there any biomimicry going on in solar PV? Do the silicon atoms and the phosphate atoms and the boron atoms in any way mimic nature? And to that I said, no, in the same way that most airplanes do not flap their wings to fly. I mean, sure, they've got wings and all that like birds, but this is photosystem 1. So this is what nature came up with in order to convert electromagnetic radiation in a fairly narrow bandwidth in the 400 to 600 nanometer range into electrons. And there have been countless dissertations that actually describe this process. But basically, the photon comes in. Remember, there's 3 things that can happen to a photon. It can be reflected, transmitted, or absorbed. In this case, this lucky photosystem 1 molecule says, hey, I want to absorb you. And now there's enough energy on the order of, remember that 1 electron volt, which is 10 to the minus 16th joules. There's enough energy to kick that electron up into another orbital, and that then leads to a series of cascade events. So I'm just showing you the molecule itself, and it is just sort of, it's like the catcher's mitt, and after it hits the catcher's mitt, then the catcher throws to second base to get the guy out. Then maybe there's a double play somewhere else. So that electron gets shuttled all over the place, and all these other little arrows and gizmos show you the transfer of energy. So incredibly complex, but this is basically one of the mechanisms that evolved at the nanoscale in order to make all of the biomass we see around us. Yes?
Can we clear up what the difference is between a photovoltaic and a mechanical leaf? Because they are making...
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good question. That's a good question. So the question is, what's the difference between a photovoltaic and a mechanical leaf? Well, I think...
Because I read 2 or 3 days ago on
Yeah.
the internet about one that they produced recently that apparently is 10 times better at it than an actual leaf.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay, that's you bring up a good point. So is there a synthetic? I wouldn't call it a mechanical leaf, but I'd call it a synthetic or artificial leaf that's 10 times better than PV. I wouldn't be surprised because right here with photosystem 1, I mean, we're basically dealing with evolution. This just kind of happened through mutations and natural selection. In the case of engineering, if you remember the second and third generation cells that we talked about, so there was the lab I visited in Japan, it's hitting 48%. They're hitting 48% because we've engineered materials to capture frequencies that nature just doesn't. That's how. I mean, or we've sort of stacked them. We sort of said, hey, I'll take the green, I'll take the blue, I'll take all of them. So versus, gosh, the poor leaf that's doing the best it can, is it going to have to re-evolve a whole different set of layers and incorporate an entirely new genome to get at some of the what some of these other cyanobacteria go after, the blue. So photosystem 1 is just one example of natural photon to electron catcher's mitt, but in every single case though, in both the artificial and the natural, you're still bringing in a photon and kicking an electron up into a higher orbital so that it behaves like a metal. Just so it behaves like a conductor. And if you've got a cathode and an anode at the end of that conductor, the electron's gonna go towards the positive.
I'm gonna find that article.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Okay.
It was trying to get onto that fact. Maybe we could incorporate the use of some gas in the structure of the PV cells to sort of mimic the greenhouse gas effect, but
would you use a gas? Well, I think, so one thing we learned in chapter 3 is that solar panels become more efficient at lower temperatures. And we also know that the 3 modes of heat transfer are radiation, conduction, and convection. So one thing we did do a couple of years ago in the practicum, we plugged in 2 12-volt fans that consumed 2 watts of electricity to convect heat away from the panels, because we were running, it was like 100 degrees in the summer or whatever. Those 2 watts of convective energy actually reduced the temperature of the panels enough that they produced 4 watts of extra electricity. Similar to, your body spends a little bit of energy sweating, but that allows you to get the heat away and move faster. So you're not far off. I mean, so there are and there's even efforts. Jonathan Bowe, who teaches geothermal for us, says, hey, let's just use the 52-degree air that's under the ground to keep our panels at a constant temperature too. So lots of different ways to combine, and we'll see more of that when we get into chapter 10, integration. Yeah, but I like the way you're thinking of it. Yeah. Okay, so that's where I want to start, just kind of with the small scale there. That's the little molecular booger that makes all this other stuff possible. So we've moved from solar thermal. That little photosystem 1 is sort of the transition, if you will, from artificial photosynthesis, if you want to call that, or just PV, solar electric, and then on into bioenergy. Okay, so we will study each of these materials in detail, but bioenergy is looking at bringing energy from wood, straw, oil seeds, animal waste, etc., all of which are biomass. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that these are all chemical, so every one of these reactions has happened through some chemistry. The photon comes in, activates the electron. That's what allows plants to make sugar. From the sugar, they make starches. From the starches, they make cellulose, etc. The animals then eat that. But what we're looking at are essentially breaking those carbon bonds. That's it. When carbon is recombined with oxygen, so think back to the plant. In the plant, the photon comes in to actually break the CO2 molecule. That's the big cycle to keep in mind, is that CO2 molecule, you can't go hit it with a hammer, you can't go put some pliers on it. I mean, the nano machinery inside of plants is what breaks that CO2 molecule apart. The carbon stays behind as a solid in the plant, and the oxygen is released to the gas. What we're doing here is just the opposite. We're just reversing that reaction by recombining the oxygen to make this. Okay. Now, I think the paper that you're reading for Summary 2 is a really good segue. That's one of the main reasons I included Summary 2 with this chapter, because what we're looking at is the total biomass. So you remember the graph with the, what was it, 2,000, how many exajoules, or how many zetajoules were there total? Was it two? It was 2 zetajoules per year, but the entire, but the whole.
Primary production.
What was the whole budget? 2,000. Yeah. It was actually, if you take up all of the carbon bonds, it's something like 2,000 zetajoules, but a lot of it's inaccessible.
The non-recoverables.
The non-recoverables. There you go. Okay. So, and it does say, although the majority is unavailable, that's your 2,000 zetajoules. It's a store which is continuously replenished by the flow of energy from the sun through photosynthesis. And I just showed you the molecule responsible for photosynthesis. There it is, CO2 comes from the air, releases the oxygen, carbon stays behind, and there's basically your carbon sequestration mechanism. Right now, like right here, right now in Stevensville, Montana, we are working on a technology to do this in the absence of sunlight. And we've seen some results. We don't know how it works, but I'll show those to you later.
Like plant respiration?
Like microbe respiration.
Microbes?
Yeah,
Oh.
inside a dark, wet place. So and we're not, but what we're not sure of, so we actually have shown some carbon sequestration. What we're not clear on is what the full chemistry is, because it's very complicated. But we have shown it, and we're not sure if it's of biological origin or if it's just a physiochemical deal, right? We're not really sure if this CO2 molecule is finding its way into an organism or if it's just being split like you might see in a catalytic reaction. Okay. Yeah, so these guys make kind of a similar point that Shramsky says, like, are we really turning the Earth into the moon? And there's some interesting videos out there showing that, gosh, the more concrete you put on the planet, the more it tends to look like the moon. So, yeah. So obviously, we need the oxygen in order to support the diverse biosphere. Respiration, as I just mentioned, is effectively the opposite of photosynthesis, where we bring in oxygen into our lungs and emit CO2 as a waste product. Evaporation, that's just water leaving the Earth's surface. And I think as we saw last time, Shramsky actually talks about this, a quarter of all evaporation is driven by human activity. A quarter. It's a lot. Seems like a lot.
That might even be even more so now.
Well, it's not clear if it's going up or down, but probably
Especially
going
when
up.
Combustion is to be considered,
Yeah.
particularly nuclear.
Yeah. Okay, so humus or peat, that's sort of material that could become coal if left, to its druthers, left long enough. And then here's what we're looking at in terms of the thermodynamics of the system. So, and we've seen, here's our solar budget, 10,000 times greater than what we use. What we'll see later is there's a section of the chapter that kind of takes you through a box that says only a very small fraction. This might have been where you were going with that, Tyler. Is like, how efficient is photosynthesis? So only a very small fraction of the total photons that hit the plant actually become a carbon bond.
I found that article.
Yeah.
They were at MIT.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you can also see the sort of the flow of energy through the system. So once these carbon bonds are formed, The animal says, yum, I will take those, break them down, turn them into glucose, power my brain and my muscles with them. The rabbit itself, just as the rest of us, we are not at thermodynamic equilibrium with nature. We're warm-blooded, so we are always radiating, and anything that's, these plants too, I mean, they're maintaining their own metabolism, so they're always sort of jockeying position on the entropy charts, if you will. Okay, so here you've got nuclear energy going on, electromagnetic, chemical, and then there's your thermal, your sort of thermal waste.
So the thought of the fact that we're changing the climate so drastically by our actions themselves, it doesn't give the rest of nature time enough to evolve to compensate for that change.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you could certainly make that argument that. Well, I think we talked a little bit about the so-called sixth extinction, and yeah, I mean, once you eliminate a species from the biosphere, yeah, I mean, evolution can take on a lot of different forms, but that yeah, and the few other people have said we've sort of entered the post-Darwinian age, where Darwin said, hey, here's evolution, this is what's been going on the planet. Well, now we can manipulate genes very effectively. In fact, this morning on the news, there was an article about the molecular tool called CRISPR. There's a big battle between MIT and Berkeley right now. So CRISPR is a gene editing tool to say, hey, you want to get rid of whatever disease, or you want to manufacture whatever protein, here it is. It was maybe 10 years ago this was developed, and pretty effective at genetic engineering. So, so you might say, well, yeah, we're sort of eliminating a lot of species that took a long time to get here, but hey, who knows what's next? We can make a whole new batch with them.
Right.
On that note, I'm reading
Yeah.
a book right now that put it like all the predators on the planet who were at the top of the food chain before like humans kind of
Yeah.
rose to the top. They had to evolve over time, and so all of the animals that they like would hunt
Yeah.
had time to evolve to be able to
Sure.
get away. So there's this checks and balance thing that happened over time, like
Sure.
millions of years.
Yeah.
But with humans, we just kind of jumped right to the top. So the animals had no way of evolving to like protect themselves from chemicals, from
Yep.
like deforestation, things like that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like they're basically saying like we like skipped the whole evolutionary process. With
Yeah.
that now it's way out of bounds.
Yeah, no, monkeys with thumbs and brains are pretty effective at killing large predators. Yeah, and one of my favorites though is the hand axe that is found in Africa a bunch. It's just big sharp rock, throw it up in the air, lands on a water buffalo, and you're not like fighting tooth and nail for dinner. You actually have a technology. But yeah, the hand axe is sort of one of our first technologies that allowed us to gain access to larger quantities of protein, more or less. So, yeah. So, what's mentioned here is fuel, and a lot of different versions of that. You can think of coal as fueling our power plants. You can think of oil and gas fueling our vehicles. You can think of natural gas as fueling our homes, most of which is ancient or recent biomass. Well, shoot, go down, cut down a tree, stick it in the fireplace, and now you're warm. Or, gosh, distill some butane, take it out and cook with it, or whatever, however. So it's all just something that burns. Fuel is the carbon-based, could be hydrogen-based. I mean, you can burn pure hydrogen as well, but something that's going to burn to make heat. Two common categories of biomass. So traditional, wood, and even, believe it or not, dung is a traditional biomass in parts of the world. Intermediate biofuels. So there's charcoal that's made from wood, typically. Biogas, there are a number of people working on, there are some utilities that do that. They'll take the biogas from their landfill or from their wastewater treatment plant and make either heat or electricity with it. Bioethanol is another one. That's basically where you're allowing yeast to metabolize sugars to make the ethanol. Biodiesel is another, typically made from fats. So they're your intermediate. And then the new or modern bioenergies, and so that's your algae, your switchgrass, purpose-grown crops. And you'll see a lot of this in Europe. There's a whole biojet industry for growing crops to fuel jet engines, and even the U.S. military has research into this as well.
So what percentage would the reduction be in regards to the ratio of fossil fuels versus the biofuels?
Well, it remains to be seen, and a lot of it's just driven by simple energy return on energy invested economics of what's it cost to go get that next barrel of oil versus what's it cost to acquire that next tract of land and grow the crops. So a lot of it's just purely driven by economics, what it costs to put the technology in place, acquire the real estate, drilling rights, et cetera.
Yeah, with the incentive of needing the reduction in fossil fuel usage and dependence, these new markets will spring up and
Oh, yeah.
respectively get the support that they require.
Oh yeah, and they are. They absolutely are. Okay, so and then the question is could biomass be, quote, sustainable? So the question is there enough biomass being grown on an annual basis to support it? And the Shramsky paper indicates maybe with that 4-to-1 4-to-1 ratio. And we also saw in the Shramsky paper with that green line in figure 2 or 3 with the reduction in power per capita that just recently happened, first time ever. A reduction, it could be, hey, we're just more efficient. We're making our planes lighter, better gas mileage. I'm looking out right here at this electric bus in front of me, and if the university said, hey, we're not buying any more fossil fuel energy, we want to make sure all of our energy comes from the dams, from the Gordon Butte, et cetera, or from the biomass plant that fizzled. There was a big plan to replace and I can even see the gas stack from here too. The gas stack on plant that makes steam. There was a proposal to have a biomass plant at the University of Montana to supplement and ultimately replace that one, but there was a lot of resistance from the community. We don't need more particulates in the air.
Could you just filter it?
Beg pardon?
Could you just filter
You could, yeah. In fact, the same biofilter that I've been mentioning we proposed to do that, but it was just too big a rush. No, let's move on. Where are you going to put all this wood? There's no place on campus to stack all this wood. Yeah, and it was just it was something like 10 tons per day. It was just like yeah. So anyway, there was that, and it also struck at a time when they needed a sole source contract from a single, and this is just the way the language is built in. They needed a sole source contract from a single company to supply all the wood for 10 or 20 years. And in just where the timber industry was, like, sorry guys, we can't do it for that cheap. We just can't compete with natural gas.
Yeah,
So
especially since all of the timber industry went north to Canada.
yeah, and you'll hear the current administration blame the Clinton administration for NAFTA, et cetera, opening up our markets. Well, just as our federal government subsidizes various industries, getting the car industry, the fossil fuel industry off the ground, the Canadian government heavily subsidizes its timber industry, which really hurts our own. So
Yeah, NAFTA grew in the Midwest.
yeah. So I'll do one more little thing here, then we'll take a break. So let's just look at these numbers. So box 4.1, very approximate basic data about the quantities of biomass worldwide and the flow of energy. So freshly harvested, moisture content. One thing I am going to ask you to put in your notes is to understand the difference between what's called the lower heating value and the higher heating value of fuel. So if I've got a wet piece of wood or a wet piece of coal or whatever, let's just say there's some water in my fuel. The water molecule itself will not burn, will not break. It will only heat up and jiggle just like the nitrogen, the diatomic nitrogen will. So any combustion energy from burning O2 with carbon, to produce the CO2, a lot of that energy just goes into making steam. And you're like, well, I didn't really want the steam, I really wanted the heat, but if you take the steam and recondense it, the heat's then recovered. So there's two values for fuel. One is called the lower heating value, and that's where you just allow all of the steam to escape into the atmosphere, and just the hot steam just goes to the atmosphere and you don't recover it, right? Or what's called the higher heating value, where the energy from that steam comes back. And you'll see this in a lot of houses now, where there's a retrofit on a boiler or a furnace. It's called a condensing boiler or a condensing furnace. And so what they'll do is capture that steam, and the steam itself will come back, and that heat will remain in the house rather than being released.
It's like that little blueprint that you had me read in your office one day, that public shower that reused.
Oh, yeah.
the
Yeah,
heat
yeah.
and
Yeah.
water.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, so here's the energy budget for planet Earth. Total mass of all living matter, 1,800 billion dry tons. That's a pretty good chunk. And I like this, how the total mass in land plants is the same number, and then the ocean only has 4. Well, it's a small fraction. It's less than 1% is kind of the point there.
That's a matter of dry. The wet is probably unmeasurable, unknown.
No, it's pretty well known. It's there. Yeah, 4 billion. There you go. There you go. World populations. This book is a little dated. We've added 600,000. We've added 2 United States of Americas to the world population since 2009. So they're it's a little like, wow, that seems like a lot. But the U.S. population has been added to planet Earth twice since 2009. Per capita terrestrial presence. So what this means is that each one, so they just divide those two numbers by each other and say, okay, here's your, here, Brad, here's your 270 dry tons. Rob, here's yours. Tyler, here's yours. It might seem like a lot. It's not that much. 270 dry tons. Let's just do that really quick. You guys know what a ton is, right? A ton of wood would just about fit under this desk. 1,000 pounds. Just imagine, 1,000 kilograms, 2,000 pounds. So if we take the cube root of that, so let's just see. Well, 27. Let's see if we do 27. I'll pull up Excel because I just don't trust my arithmetic like I used to. So I want to turn the tons into a volume. So I'm making an approximation of the density. So let's just say equals power 270, comma 1/3. So it's only about a 20 foot by 20 foot by 20 foot block of wood. I mean, it's not much bigger than this room. Like each person on the planet has about as much which is a little mind blowing. As you go out into Montana, you're like, oh man, there's my 270 dry tons right there. Go to Manhattan, like, oh man, we're all fighting for that one little tree. What do you mean? So the numbers can seem really big or really small at the same time. Is my point. But a 6.5 by 6.5 by 6.5 cubic meter of wood is basically what each one of us has at our disposal. Okay, so there's the energy stored in terrestrial biomass. You can go and check that to see how that compares with Shramsky. Net annual production, again, see how that compares with Shramsky. Shramsky's saying this is 130 billion dry tons. And actually, when we take a break here, I want to double check that. Here's the rate of energy storage. So, yeah, that's about right. So there's your 2,500 exajoules per year. Remember we talked about that 500 exajoule per year budget. So it's 5 to 1, 4 to 1. You know, it shows that Earth is making biomass 4 to 5 times faster than we consume it. Yeah, because there's your 502.
You can always genetically engineer plants to grow that too.
Well, we can continue to do so. You mean that we do that every day?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time. Yeah. And there's your biomass energy consumption. So what that tells us right there is approximately 10% of our primary consumption is from biomass. That's what that means right there. And then as food, again, we've done that calculation a bunch of times. You know, take your 7 billion people, multiply that by 10 megajoules, and that's your energy budget. Okay, so let's take a break there. We'll get into some more chapter 4.